Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Indie Alaska is an innovative weekly web series capturing the diverse and colorful lifestyle of Alaskans. Real stories of everyday Alaskans at work and play. Supported in part by Alyeska Pipeline Service Company.
The National Weather Service.
Good Tuesday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 23rd of September, and as always, we encourage you to visit our website at weather.gov/Alaska or arh.noaa.gov. The weather info line's open at 1-800-472-0391. You can call that anytime and find weather information throughout your day on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. If you go to YouTube and type in AKwx TV, you can find previous editions of Alaska Weather, including tonight's show. If you wait a little bit after this evening's show, you'll find the full upload there, or from our broadcast partner here at alaskapublic.org. You can go to their website as well. And in the afternoon, find a shorter, condensed version of what we're going to talk about on Alaska Weather that evening. If you go to NWS Anchorage or NWS Fairbanks on YouTube, you'll find those broadcasts there. Here's a look at the warnings as of tonight. Flood advisories continue for areas around the Tonsina River area, thanks to some of the glacially dammed lakes there that could be releasing some water. They're not exactly sure which one right now, thanks to some of the information we're getting there, though. The levels could be rising. We'll see if that improves quickly this evening. Looking a little bit further northward into the Brooks Range, snow has been falling in that area, and snow totals probably on the order of about 3 to 6 inches, with another 1 to 3 expected during the evening and overnight hours. It should rapidly diminish as we get into the morning, but travel across Adigan Pass and places in those higher terrain spots could be a little bit tricky at times. Below 1,500 feet, the snow should be melting fairly quickly, but above 1,500 feet, again, that snow might make things a little bit more difficult to travel through. Looking out across the Bering Sea in the North Pacific, once again, our wide trough of moisture that's working its way eastward is moving a little bit more west-east rather than south to north at this point. You can see some of the cooler weather up across the Chukchi Seacoast also working its way north and east. Ridge of high pressure here across the west is allowing more of that weather to move from north to south at this point across the west coast of Alaska. When you look a little bit more at the mainland, you can see a much stronger storm located south and west of Haida Gwaii. This is around 970 millibars or so, working its way northward, pushing a lot of moisture across Haida Gwaii and into the Dixon entrance. Some stronger winds are aloft as well, so if you're planning to fly southward, there's certainly been some turbulence issues there. Wind speeds around 3,000 feet, I believe, or around 50 knots. We'll check that here in just a few minutes, but some heavy rain falling in that area as well. Now, this is pulling in much drier weather off the continent, so you can see a wealth of dry air across the northern Gulf Coast. We have a cold front crossing through the interior, and if you're in the middle Tanana Valley today or anywhere in those parts, you probably noticed a little bit of a weather change, a little bit of rain, maybe a little bit of snow, and maybe some snizzle in between. Wasn't really sure. It sounded like from what people were saying there, if it was all rain or all snow or something that was a new precipitation pattern perhaps, but a little bit of a mix it sounded like there around the Fairbanks area. So welcome to winter and astronomical fall, of course. Up across the north slope, plenty of clouds today, some gusty winds from time to time, and a little bit of precipitation out around St. Paul today, about 5/100ths of an inch. Barrow has about an inch of snow on the ground already, and around Fairbanks, about 2/10 or so fell today. That was probably liquid and snow combined. As you look at the pattern one more time, low pressure sitting north of Point Barrow is drawing in another round of clouds. We're going to have this frontal boundary stick around across the interior for the next 24 hours or so. And as a result, we can expect some spotty precipitation generally across the lower and middle Yukon Valley. But a lot of what we're going to see across the south should dry up. And the action will be up across the Arctic seacoast as far as any additional precipitation goes, as well as the Brooks Range, where a lot of that is falling apart quickly. Today's weather map shows that 998 millibar low up across the Beaufort Sea. Reports are that the sea ice hit its minimal extent there last Thursday, so almost a week ago now. Things are already beginning to refreeze, and we'll check that ice map here in just a few minutes. To our south, you can see the 973 millibar low there, well south of Haida Gwaii and off the coast of the Pacific Northwest. Certainly some gales involved in that. That's moving northward slowly. With that, it's pushing the rain shield and the clouds further and further north, but it is dragging in drier air across the northern and western Gulf, as well as Kodiak Island. Frontal boundary is locking up around the Alaska Range, and there might be a few snow showers with that as we head through tonight, but nothing too substantial at all. The focus for any accumulating snow will be up across the Brooks Range with that winter weather advisory. Up across the Chukchi Seacoast, periods of rain and snow slowly moving eastward. That'll be back across the coastal plain and the western slopes of the Brooks Range as we get into Wednesday. Better chance for some rain showers the lower in elevation you go. High pressure trying to move into eastern Norton Sound. And showers will be found across the Alaska Range and out across the Bering Sea. Most of what we'll see here will be really limited in its scope, so nothing really to worry about. Thursday looks like a sunny day for many across the lower terrain of Alaska, the Yukon Valley, the Kuskokwim Valley, South Central, Prince William Sound, everywhere except southeast, southwest, and the North Slope. Out across the eastern Gulf, 995 millibar low, so this is filling in now from that gale that was working its way northward. Showers spreading into parts of the stationary boundary and the surrounding area of southeast. That could include Juneau all the way down to Ketchikan and Nanette. 983 millibar low there north of Unalaska and Dutch Harbor. That will be the next game changer as that moves out of the North Pacific. Watch for a pretty strong southerly connection across the Alaska Peninsula. Strong easterly flow cutting across Bristol Bay and around Port Heiden. And then a stronger north and westerly flow coming across Adak and Atka as that storm is trekking eastward. Here's a look at temperatures today. 50s and 60s across across southeast there. That storm moving northward, though, is cutting back on temperatures around the Dixon entrance on Haida Gwaii. You see temperatures in the lower to mid 50s, about the same as what you had in Juneau. Sitka made it up to 62 degrees today, around 64, closer to a net after a high today nearing 69 degrees. Prince William Sound saw temps in the mid 50s. Anchorage about 56, 57 for Homer, not a bad day at all. 53 around Talkeetna, and 30s and 40s for the interior. At 4 o'clock, Fairbanks was back to 39 degrees, 43 in Eagle, and 45 in Northway. 37 for Fort Yukon, only 28 though for AKwx Pass. Low 30s for Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse and Kaktovik at 34. Barrow was 32, again with an inch of snow on the ground. Low to mid 30s from Wainwright westward toward Point Hope and Point Lay. Kivalina was 40 with Kotzebue at 42, Shishmaref at 39, and lower 40s for Nome all the way around Norton Sound to Unalakleet at 43. McGrath, a little bit more on the interior side, 48 around the Kuskokwim, and lower 50s there as you get out toward Bethel, 55 Nunivak Island. For southwest, around Bristol Bay and Dillingham, temperatures hovered in the lower to mid 50s today, about the same there in Kodiak, low 50s for St. Paul and St. George with a little bit of fog and a little bit of light rain, and lower 50s for most of the Alaska Peninsula. Sandpoint was 52, Cold Bay and False Pass also lower 50s, Unalaska and Dutch Harbor 51, Adak and Atka in the low to mid 50s, and Shemya showed 51 degrees. Overnight low temperatures then in southeast will be a little bit cooler, especially on the northern side where you don't have as many clouds. Look at Yakutat, only 35. A little bit further south, closer to 50 degrees, closer to the Dixon entrance. Sitka in the upper 40s. Kodiak about 41, and temperatures in south central could easily drop into the 30s and maybe some eastern parts of Anchorage in the upper 20s. So plan for some cooler weather with that clear sky. The interior looking at mid 20s, some places up toward Tanana and a little bit further northward will drop into the teens and low 20s tonight, including many across the Brooks Range and AKwx Pass and Arctic Village. Upper 20s for the Arctic coast, and for Kotzebue Sound, you're looking at temps in the lower to mid 30s, 32 in Nome. Around Bethel, 43. At Bristol Bay, probably mid 30s, I should say, 45 in St. Paul, and low to mid 40s for the Alaska Peninsula and the chain. With highs tomorrow there back in the lower 50s, 52 in Nunivak Island, 48 in St. Lawrence Island, Nome 46, the Arctic coast, mid to upper 30s, mid 40s for the Tanana Valley and areas in the mid to upper Yukon, probably looking at similar temperatures, 40s to low 50s for southwest, and Prince William Sound and south central, upper 40s and lower 50s, closer to 50 for Anchorage, and mid to upper 50s for a good chunk of southeast. A few coastal locations might be a little bit near 60 degrees. So that's Wednesday. Here's your flying weather then. IFR conditions from about Prudhoe Bay, Dead Horse, westward toward Wainwright. That does include Point Barrow. Some pockets of IFR around the Pribilofs and westward there. And most of the Bering back under MVFR. Same goes for the eastern Gulf up to about Sitka, eastward toward Petersburg and southward, where IFR conditions should be expected for Ketchikan, Annanette, and maybe some places closer to Craig and Klawock. As you look out west, there's also some pockets of MVFR across the lower Kuskokwim Valley. For your passes, expect improving conditions. Remember, snow right now will likely wind down as we head into the overnight and early morning hours tomorrow. VFR conditions then by the end of the day, and some big improvements there for Adigan Pass, so it might be a little bit bright tomorrow once that clears off. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass expecting VFR conditions by the end of the day. Improvements for Rainy Pass as well, heading for visual flight rule. Windy Pass, we expect to see VFR, and probably looking at improving conditions for Isabel Pass for your Wednesday. Mentasta Pass right now we're going to call VFR, even though the front's lingering through. Teneda Pass right now looks okay. Doesn't look like we're going to see any turbulence issues, but watch for some gusts coming through Portage as we go through tomorrow, even though the weather should be visually okay. Chilkoot and White Pass also expected to see visual flight rule conditions. Here's a look at freezing levels now, and obviously the cold weather is winning the day for Wednesday. Surface freezing line cutting across the west coast all the way down to the Alaska Range, Prince William Sound, and then back up through the Yukon. All this is below freezing for tomorrow morning. The elevated freezing lines around 2,000 to 4,000 foot across a good chunk of Alaska. You can see the 6,000 foot line there just west of Nikolsky, and 6,000 to 8,000 foot freezing levels across the Gulf and in through southeastern Alaska. What about icing potential? Well, there's enough moisture and cold air that if you go up around 6,000 to 8,000 feet, probably above 8, you'll run into some occasional moderate across some areas in central and eastern sections of southeast Alaska as that gale is moving northward. That's pushing that wet air up over some colder weather. Out across the Bering Sea, above 6,000 feet, a widespread area of light, maybe isolated moderate there, mainly above 6,000, and out across areas north of the Bering Strait and the Chukchi Seacoast above 6,000 feet. So Shishmaref out toward Kivalina and Kotzebue probably have at least some potential for occasional moderate tomorrow. And from areas east of Prudhoe Bay and Deadhorse toward Kaktovik above 2,000 feet, many areas across the coastal plain west and east will be looking at some light to isolated moderate freezing potential there. Here's our jet stream, and the active pattern is brought to us by these dips that we see in the main jet stream here. The fast-moving river of air there, around 30,000 feet or higher, is allowing troughs of low pressure to develop. One of those is supplying that moisture and energy source needed for the gale coming northward toward Haida Gwaii out of the Pacific Northwest. And the other system here is out across the Bering. This is guiding some faster moving winds on the north side and pushing a lot of that moisture northward into the western Gulf, but the main core of that activity is being shunted southward and fueling the far eastern storm. Meanwhile, cold air is a little bit cut off. It's allowing some of that surface cold air to drop southward, but the main core of that Arctic jet stream is keeping the main energy there from driving all the way down into southwest Alaska and south central and southeastern Alaska for now. At 9,000 feet, a broad westerly flow is also making that possible. You can see those wind speeds from 15 to 20 knots. A little bit of a faster flow south of the Aleutians, about 40 to 50 knots, and weak ridging here across the Yukon-Kuskokwim coastline and the Alaska Peninsula, and offshore flow, all feeding into that much larger storm system there south of Haida Gwaii, with wind speeds there coming up into the passages around 20 to as high as 50 knots. That's well to the south right now, but again, some of that air is working its way northward. At 3,000 feet, a little bit of a slower flow on the south side, but look at some of those wind speeds coming up into southeast, 40 to 50 knots. So once again, watch for some turbulence in those areas. West and southwesterly flow coming up the Yukon Valley, pretty slow, not too bad, 10 to 15 knots, and a little bit of a faster flow across the Arctic coast. Lows out across the Bering showing wind speeds around 10 to 15 knots, 20 knots on the west side, and there's our weak ridge out across the North Pacific and across the west coast. So turbulence potential, I'm going to focus on areas generally just south of Annette and Ketchikan, but again, this could be drifting northward throughout the day, generally below 6,000 feet. We're also watching the north around 5,000 feet and below. Watch for some areas of occasional moderate there across Point Hope and Point Lay inward toward some areas a little bit further east of Red Dog Mine, and then also across Adigan and Anaktuvik Pass. Otherwise, things look pretty good and relatively smooth with improving weather for southwest and south central. If you're flying, you should have some pretty good visibility throughout the day with some increase in poor visibility for parts of southeast and probably some turbulence developing for the southern third of southeastern Alaska. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back in just a few minutes with your marine weather. Stay tuned.
2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen. Water. A drop can indicate coming rain. A mist can be refreshing. A river can power an entire community. The ocean can inspire awe in all of us. The forces of nature that create waves also create an inviting opportunity for wholesome entertainment. But on almost any beach in the country, the waves that come crashing ashore could also hide a dangerous and deadly force: the rip current. Few natural events are as powerful as rip currents. The rip current is the coming together of several different forces just a few feet from the beach. First, a sandbar appears offshore. Waves that would normally not break until hitting the beach instead break on the sandbar. The water from the waves is trapped by the sandbar and cannot move naturally back to sea. This creates water that funnels a fast-moving current away from shore. In that short time, anything or anybody caught in this flow of water can be pulled out in the current. That is where the danger comes in.
When a person gets caught in one, maybe they don't even know they're in one, but what's going to happen is they're going to find themselves getting further and further away from shore. If they find themselves in this situation, the first thing they need to do is not panic. That's the #1 rule: don't panic.
Even the strongest and most skilled swimmers can get caught in a rip current. Nationally, more than 100 deaths a year are attributed to rip currents. About 75% of all lifeguard rescues are rip current rescues. Swimmers can find themselves in a hopeless situation if they don't recognize the signs of a rip current and know how to escape its grasp.
The rip currents are fairly slow to form. It depends on the shoreline. Some areas they're very persistent in one place, and other areas they move around all the time. In most beaches, they're not dangerous or present most of the time. It's only under fairly brief periods of time where they really become a threat to people and swimmers.
By knowing the different forces that cause a rip current, you can tell with some certainty where one is flowing away from the beach. But even with that skill, it's always good to swim near a lifeguard station and check with the lifeguard to see if a rip current exists where you plan to swim. The first sign is the sandbar offshore, where you'll see breaking waves in a shallow area. If you see a sandbar, start searching for the other elements that make up a rip current. If one exists, you'll see water and sea foam moving through breakers and farther offshore. You'll then see different colored water beyond the surf. The water will actually highlight the narrow currents.
There are a lot of subtle indicators that a rip current is present and that it may be a threat. Some of those indicators are more turbid or dirtier water that shows up with farther outside the surf zone particularly. You see it out beyond the breakers, and that's a good indicator that there may be a rip current present.
Rip currents can occur anywhere along the shoreline. Swimmers should be especially cautious around jetties or piers. But there is one warning sign that will leave you with no doubt. When you see warning flags, which can differ in look and style from beach to beach, it means one thing: don't swim. The rip current can kill.
The red flags are there for your safety. Each morning, each one of the beach patrol services on the Outer Banks has a supervisor who gets up and checks the water conditions. If we feel like the water conditions are such that are a danger to your personal safety, we put the red flags up.
Ultimately, there may be a time when you become caught in the rip current. If you're caught in a rip current, the one key rule to remember is to not swim against it. Swim parallel to the shore. You'll either swim out of the current or swim until the current itself dissipates.
A lot of people think that when they're in a rip current, they can't get back to shore, and that scares them. And they think that they can't get back to shore where they are and also all up and down the beach, and that's not true. It's just maybe 50 yards wide where the rip current is. If you swim parallel 50 yards one way or the other with the beach, it doesn't matter, then it's a lot easier to swim back to shore.
Most rip currents dissipate after about 50 to 75 yards. Then you can swim parallel to the shore. Do not hesitate to wave to get help. Drop by drop, the ocean's water is enjoyable, powerful, and at times can be dangerous. The beaches of the Atlantic are some of the most beautiful in the country and provide enough physical challenges and pure fun to enjoy without risking your life by swimming in a rip current. Study the facts and be careful. Parents should make themselves aware of the conditions of the water before letting their children swim. And when children are swimming, parents should keep a sharp eye on them all the time. We want you to enjoy your time in the waters of the Atlantic. But before you do, check the conditions. Make sure no rip current or any other dangerous conditions exist by checking with the lifeguard.
I think the best thing that people can do is always find out where the lifeguard stand is, swim in front of the lifeguard stand, and when you get onto the beach, before you get in the water, walk up to the lifeguard, ask them, are there any problems with the water that day?
When you come down on vacation, you just really need to be smart about the ocean. Speak to your lifeguard, and by understanding is your best defense against this ocean, and understanding can be talking to that lifeguard.
Swim with a buddy, swim in your ability, and don't take chances. We want everybody to come down and have a good time and leave safe.
It's an easy thing to do, and when you are sure the water is safe, the ocean will be yours to cool off in and enjoy for years to come.
All right, here's a look at today's sea ice edge, and already we're hearing from our Alaska Sea Ice program that there is more ice forming out there across the edges of a boundary that we have shaded in here today. Also, with the cooler temperatures across the coast, fresh water is probably starting to freeze up, so keep an eye on that. You can always get the latest outlook as well as information about forecasts to come for the season at weather.gov/anchorage/ice.php for Alaska Sea Ice program. Here's a look at southeast as we head into Wednesday. A northerly flow feeding into the gale that's well to the south of Haida Gwaii at this point. Northerlies as strong as 25 to 30 knots in the Lynn Canal with 5-foot seas there. Southeasterlies coming up through the Clarence Strait. Coastal waters, you're looking at more of a north-northeasterly flow, about 15 to 20 knots. By Thursday, winds are subsiding just a little bit, but you can see they're picking up across the central and northern waterways. They're 25 to 30 knots, 5 to 6-foot seas. Coastal waters probably 20 to 25 knots from a north and easterly direction, with 7 to 9-foot seas in the north, 11 to 12-foot seas in the south, and 4 to 6-foot seas in the inner waterways on Thursday. For South Central, more of a light northerly flow coming offshore. That's 15 to 20 knots around Prince William Sound. Easy for me to say. It must be winter in my mouth. 15 to 20 knots there in Prince William Sound and on the outside as well. There we go. 3-foot seas on the inside, 3 to 4, even 5-foot seas heading down toward the Barren Islands and Cook Inlet, and northwesterlies coming across Kodiak Island, 15 to 25 knots with 7-foot seas in the western Gulf. As we get into Thursday, the winds probably won't be as gusty out of the Copper River Basin, so you won't have to worry about that as much. In fact, they subside to about 10 knots or so, with more of a variable flow in the north and western Gulf outside of Resurrection Bay and through Cook Inlet, 10 to 15 knots generally from the north, more of a variable flow inside of Shelikof Strait with a 3-foot sea, 6-foot seas on the eastern side of Kodiak. Now across the Alaska Peninsula, watch for winds to pick up as we head into Thursday. They'll be fairly light for Bristol Bay and all the way from Port Hayden out toward the northern coastline of the Alaska Peninsula. 15 to 25 knots on the Pacific side with 4 to 6-foot seas. Take a look at Thursday. Big change, 20 to 40 knots there across the Bering Sea coast, 20 to 35 knots across the Pacific coast. 4 to 6-foot seas there on Thursday, as high as 3-foot seas there initially on Thursday. Watch for some of those seas to build as we go through the day. Wednesday across the Aleutians, more of a south and easterly flow, 4 to 5-foot seas there on the north side. 6 to 7-foot seas on the south side, and across the Kiska region out toward Attu, more of a northwesterly to southwesterly shift as the frontal boundary is crossing through there. Take a look at Thursday. The winds are picking up also across the west, 25 knots, 6 to 7 foot seas there. Westerlies coming up from 9 to 10, even 13 foot seas. Winds 30 to 40 knots, more of a stronger southerly flow, and then gales north of Unalaska with a 10-foot sea expected there as we get into Thursday. Now, as we look at the west coast, a variable flow north of Nunivak Island, only 10 knots with a 4-foot sea. Still looking at southeasterlies around the Pribilofs with a 5-foot sea. By Thursday, a much stronger easterly flow coming offshore. 20 to 25 knots there north and south of Nunivak Island. Easterlies moving across the Pribilofs with a 9-foot sea, and southerlies working northward across St. Lawrence Island. Across the Arctic coast, a broad westerly flow. One exception there, a little bit more of a southwesterly shift north of Point Barrow. 5-foot seas expected there, 8-foot seas north of Kaktovik. Watch for some small craft advisories again, and westerlies coming into the Chukchi seacoast, 6 to 7-foot seas there on Wednesday. More of a northerly shift off of Cape Lisbon. Otherwise, we'll keep that west and southwesterly flow moving in across Kotzebue Sound, about 20 knots with a 4-foot sea, 15 to 25 knots around the Beaufort seacoast with seas around 5 to 7 feet on Thursday. Here's a recap of what's going on with our weather pattern tonight. High pressure is building across the interior. It's pushing a cold front across the interior, and it's going to lodge right up across the Alaska Range. As that moves eastward into the Yukon, it's bringing with it a brief little blast of snow showers, some of that working through the Fairbanks and Middle Tanana area today. Another round of showers of rain and snow is going to try and work into the Chukchi seacoast. That too will move eastward, but there's a lot of dry air with this. That's moving into the Gulf of Alaska and clearing away clouds as a gale moves northward into southern parts of southeast tonight, and periods of rain across the southern Bering Sea coast. As that storm organizes, the storm across the east will begin to fill in, drawing in cooler and drier air. A little bit more of a broader westerly flow for the north slope by Thursday. Much drier and sunnier conditions there for the interior, southwest, and south central, with a new storm working across the southern Bering at 983 millibars, and rain and wind moving back through the eastern Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.